My elective reading is based on Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, this novel was written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And her purpose in writing Uncle Tom's Cabin was for it to be an anti-slavery novel. Because, as we all know, slavery was a big issue during this time period. And the real driving factor that made her write this novel was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And she knew that this was wrong, and some characters in her book even explain the wrongness of this act. This book is made up of two plots. One following Uncle Tom, and then another following George Harris and his family. Now, this novel starts with Tom and Eliza, which is George Harris's wife, being slaves to a good family. They treated them relatively nicely, as slaves go. But when the man of the family that they were slaves for gets too much debt on himself, he decides that he has to sell Tom and Harry, which is Eliza and George's son. And Eliza hears about this, and she's like, no, we can't split up my family. So she makes this plan to escape and meet up with her husband later. So, another key part of this is that the wife of the family did not like this. She did not like the fact of Tom being sold and being separated from his family. And he was always good to their family. They liked him. It was just the debt that made them have to sell him. He was friends with the son, which was George Shelby. And, but yeah, Eliza and George escape, and later on they reunite with each other. And Tom is sold to another family after saving the daughter, Eva. Eva gets overboard and he saves her. So the father of Eva buys Tom. Now, this family they're good to Tom because Eva becomes friends with him. Eva's a good Christian girl, and she's completely against slavery and everything of the sorts. She befriends all of the different slaves, but Eva shortly becomes very ill. And before Eva dies, one of the last things that she wanted was for her father to free Tom. But the thing is that when she dies, later on, her father dies before he gets a chance to free Tom. So Tom is no longer free, and Tom is sold to another family. Now, this one did not treat their slaves well. He's described in ways where he only gave his slaves enough for them to survive. He was not a good master. He was not nice to them. And because of this, two of the other slaves that he owned, they wanted to escape. And once they escaped, Tom knew about their whereabouts. Tom knew about their plan. Tom obviously endorsed their plan, but Tom didn't feel it was right for him to do that as well. Tom was very moral and didn't want to do anything against his Christian morals, and therefore he wasn't going to run away. But he did know about where they went, and because of this, the master was trying to get that out of him, and he would not tell him. So the master beats Tom, and he beats him almost to death, but Tom's still alive. And when he's basically dying, George Shelby from his first family comes back to try and save him because he had always wanted to rescue Tom. He had always loved Tom. Obviously now he's a lot older than he was because he was just a child basically when Tom knew him in the first place, but he came to save Tom, but it was too late. And he couldn't save Tom. Tom was dying. But he got to see his friend again, and it made him happy. But he was happy just to die a Christian in his morals and to hold to what he valued. So he died happily as a Christian, and the other characters met more family and returned to Canada with the others to live a free life. Now, one of the most important elements in Uncle Tom's Cabin was the element of character. And this obviously is important in many novels, because obviously, what would be a novel without characters? But throughout the story, the inner thoughts of the characters are divulged. And this really contributes to the whole, theme and purpose of the work, because hearing the inner thoughts of these characters that are really experiencing awful injustices, that really explains what Stowe is trying to convey to the audience. She's trying to convey how awful slavery is and how it shouldn't be able to be around anymore. And she's trying to convey this to the audience. And it plays a key role throughout the theme. Now, the main character is obviously Uncle Tom. He doesn't exactly undergo personal changes throughout the story, because he's strong in who he is. He keeps his main qualities the same throughout the entire story. He's strong in his Christian morals and what he believes. And this is conveyed throughout everything that he goes through. Despite, all of the hardships that he faced, losing people that he cared about, being separated from his family, and even in the end, dying, he just still is a strong character in Christ. And it really shows to the audience that the slaves weren't just objects. They weren't just property. They were people. And this is the most important part of her work. She's really showing that these are people that they're hurting, and it shouldn't be able to keep going. And his strong character as a Christian, and where there are points where he's passive and he doesn't even try to fight the people that obviously we would probably try and fight if they were doing those kinds of things to us. He's passive, and he chooses to hold himself back and not hurt someone or do something that he would consider unmoral. And it shows the audience that slaves were real people, and that's exactly what Stowe was trying to convey. One of the interesting quotes that explains the theme in this book is this quote. It says, "You ought to be ashamed, John. Poor, homeless, houseless creatures. It's a shameful, wicked, abominable law, and I'll break it, for one, the first time I get a chance. And I hope I shall have a chance, I do. Things have got to a pretty pass. If a woman can't give a warm supper and a bed to poor, starving creatures just because they are slaves and have been abused and oppressed all their lives, poor things." That's one of the quotes that I find very impactful. And another one that I would say is very impactful is when a badly treated slave named Prue says, "I look like going to heaven," said the woman. "Ain't there where white folks is going? S'pose they'd have me there? I'd rather go to torment and get away from Master and Missus." Now, the thing with these two quotes, why I find them impactful, is for very different reasons. The first one that I said, I think that it shows the theme of how bad slavery is. And that's what Harriet Beecher Stowe was trying to convey to the audience, about how bad slavery really was for the slaves and for everyone else, because it's so horrible. And the woman that was speaking was trying to explain that. She was trying to say that she would break the laws as fast as she could and free them all, because they don't deserve that. And it just exemplifies the same message that, the whole purpose that Stowe was trying to convey to the audience. She was trying to show society that slavery was going on, and it wasn't good. These people didn't deserve the treatment that they received. Now, the next one, I think, means a lot because it is what describes our focus area. It describes, it refers to the character of Uncle Tom, because Uncle Tom is asking this poor, beaten down slave to look to Christ and look to heaven and look to better things, because that's where Uncle Tom found his hope. He was finding his hope in life, in the awful life that he was dealt, that he would be able to go to heaven and be with God. He was telling her these things even though he knew what she had been through. He was trying to give her that same kind of hope, and that shows his character, that he never gave up. His faith didn't waver. He continued to spread the joy that he had, even in the worst situations imaginable. And that just shows how strong his character was, and it contributes to the work as a whole, saying that these were people. These weren't property and slaves. They were people that were being treated this way.